We continue today in this new series that Pastor Becky and I have been leading through with you. Oops. Well, that's all right. We're going to skip right through all of these. Okay, did I go right through it? All right. Vince is going to fix that for us while I share with you. Today is the fourth Sunday in our summer series. And that series is called Grace on the Big Screen. And what we've been doing for the last 3 weeks is looking at different movies. And today I want to continue in that practice. And we're going to be looking at Grace on the Big Screen with the fourth movie, which is entitled First Man. A look at the life of the astronaut Neil Armstrong and the legendary space mission that he led and that helped him become the first man to walk on the moon on July the 20th, 1969. And we thought an appropriate movie, First Man, this week because of that anniversary. On Tuesday, the 16th, will be the 50th anniversary of when they launched Apollo 11, and next Saturday will be the 50th anniversary of when they actually put their foot on the moon and Armstrong uttered those now famous words, "One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." If today is the first time that you're joining us for this series, this movie series, you may be asking yourself, why movies? Because, in my estimation, just as Jesus himself used the language of the culture then, his language then was of vineyards and of sheep and sheep herds and of harvests and sowing seed, etc. So we turn to modern forms of communication which will tell us and teach us timeless truths of God's love and a kingdom that has come near. In First Man, there's a scene where Neil Armstrong is being interviewed to determine his participation in the space program as it transitions from Gemini experience into the Apollo experience. And when they sat down with him and they're asking him some questions, one of the questions is, "Neil, why do you think space travel is important?" And this was his reply. He said, "I don't know what space exploration will uncover, but I don't think that it'll be exploration for the sake of exploration. I think it'll be more the fact that it allows us to see things that maybe we should have seen a long time ago, but just haven't been able to until now." I love that idea. That apparently in Neil's vision for space travel, he doesn't decide or doesn't think that we should just simply go to the moon for the sake of going to the moon. It's like we don't decide to climb the mountain that's in front of us simply because the mountain is there. But instead, I think that because of those experiences he had in the X-15 pilot, as a test pilot, and in going to the very edges, literally, of the atmosphere and to the edge of space, and he was able to see for the first time the curvature of the earth and to look beyond our atmosphere, he was able to begin to catch a glimpse of something that is far beyond us, that is bigger than you or me. Now, as I've studied about Neil Armstrong, I have discovered that he really was not a deeply religious individual. There's some question about how deep his faith went. At best, at least on the surface, he was really an agnostic, non-practicing, but one who had some belief. But I think that it was this sense that there's something bigger than us, that was this idea of Neil's, that was the God thought, as I would call it, in him, that he knew there was something more to life than what is right in front of us. Now, if you don't know Neil Armstrong's story, part of it includes the loss of a child, his daughter, at a very young age. And there's some who speculate, although Neil never really said much about it, that was part of the reason why his faith was at best a non-practicing faith. He carried some bitterness, some anger maybe even toward God about that. But nonetheless, I contend that in Neil Armstrong and even all of those who were involved in the space race, so-called then, had some sense of something that was bigger than themselves. And that's what I want us to hold on to for just a little while. You see, the weekly Bible studies that, by the way, another advertisement for it, that happen at 6:30 on Wednesday nights, right here at church, and they're led by Dan Nickel, and then also the movies that happen on Friday nights at 6:30. These are ways for us to tell the story of the gospel that speaks to our world today. As it is our purpose here at O'Fallon First United Methodist, we are always looking for ways that we can connect imperfect people to a perfect God. That's why we exist. And so if movies is one of the ways we can do that, I think that one of the things I've begun to learn about watching movies through these studies and listening to Dan talk about it is that there is so much theology. There's so much that we can learn about our lives, about ourselves, about God, even in movies. I don't remember exactly which member of the classes it was who said it, but somebody in these Bible study groups said to Dan, "Dan, you have ruined movie watching for me. I now can never just watch a movie. I'm always looking for the message, and I see the ways in which the gospel message is even present in so-called secular films." It's something that is bigger than us. It's what has been called at different times by Augustine and by C.S. Lewis and others, this yearning, this longing that is within us. C.S. Lewis called it the most satisfying desire that is most unsatisfied within us, that drives us forward to make sense of life and the world in which we live. So this Tuesday, July the 16th, we mark the 50th anniversary of the launch of the Apollo 11, which 4 days later, on July the 20th, led to the first man on the moon. This decade-long race to the moon, which began actually in the mid-50s, but was accelerated on August the 19th in 1960, when, does anybody remember what happened then? Sputnik. When Sputnik 5 successfully launched, and I didn't know this, but I learned it as I read more about this. It launched and returned to Earth 2 dogs, a rabbit, 42 mice, 2 rats, flies, and several plants and fungi on Sputnik. Did you know that? I didn't. It was the first manned, so-called, the human-like, alive flight into and safe return from. So on September the 12th in 1962, JFK gave the now famous speech from Rice Stadium at Rice University in Houston, Texas, where he said this: "We choose," I almost feel like I got to say this with that Boston accent, "we choose to go to the moon in this decade," and no, I'm just kidding, "and others, and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard." Now, that part we've heard before. I listened to the entire speech, and then I read it as I listened to it as well, and there is so much in that speech. And this is one of the things that he also said. I don't have it there. I just want you to hear it. He said this as well: "Because the goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept. Because the goal, this common goal that we as a nation of people would rally around." Now, yeah, there were some of those who thought we shouldn't be doing it, and there were protests about it. There were a lot of protests about a lot of things. And if you remember, this was the 60s. I mean, this was during a very critical time in our history as in America. It was a time when we had assassinations, when Kennedy was assassinated, both of them, and when we were fighting the Vietnam War, and there was great strife about that, and there was conflict, and so much more happening. Yet this one thing, if nothing else, brought us together and shared a vision that we could have in common and set a goal that was so far beyond us and unreachable and impossible that only by the grace of God and us working together could we accomplish. And so that's why I think that it was such an important thing, just as Kennedy has talked about it, that it organized and measured the best of our energies and skills as a people Choosing to do the hard things was, in my estimation, the decision to do the grand things for the greater goods. Something else Kennedy said in that same speech was that he said, as we set sail on this new sea to determine if it will become a force for good or ill, we decide whether this new ocean will be a sea of peace or will be a new terrifying theater of war. He believed, and so did I think we all as a nation, that if we were not the ones as a nation to get to that great destination first and then determine what it would be for, that we would not be allowed or have the capacity to determine it for peace, but instead it could become the next theater for war. War seems so common in our history as a people to that point. But I love that we as a nation, those who went before us and all of the men and women who were a part of the space race, had a vision that was bigger than themselves to do something that had peaceful purpose. So, in today's lesson, in Paul's letter to the Romans, we read what is probably one of the most well-known scriptures, at least from Romans, that we could know. We quote it here often, and that is, say it with me again, all things work together for good, for those that love the Lord and are called according to his purpose. Working together for the good. That's what this space race, in my estimation, again, as I've studied it and watched film after film about it, and then watched this movie, First Man, it was a pursuit for something that was good, that could unite us in what was otherwise a troubled world. And in today's lesson, Paul teaches us that we can be those who strive for all things to work together for good, if we would love the Lord and are called according to his purpose. But unfortunately, just like John 3:16, which we all probably know, right? For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever would believe in him shall not perish but have everlasting life. So we know that verse. But the question is, do you know the next verse? Verse 17 of John 3. John 3:17. It goes like this. Indeed, God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but instead in order that the world might be saved through him. What a great verse, too. I suspect as well, even though we know Romans 8:28, all things work together, we don't know much of what the next verses are, 29 and 30. Well, all things work together for good. Let me share with you what the next ones are. For those whom he foresaw, he has also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, in order that he might be the firstborn within a large family. And those who are predestined he has also called, and those whom he has called he has also justified, and those whom he has justified he has also glorified. Well, why don't we know that? Gee, I wonder. The other one sounds so much easier. All things work together for good for those that love the Lord, are called according to his purpose. Who wants to have to think about foreknowing and predestination and conformed and called and justified and glorified? Now, those who are among us of Calvinist theology are Presbyterians. Too bad Chris isn't here. He'd love that foreknowing and predestined. But I want to spend just a little bit of time in the context of this idea of first man and Neil Armstrong and the space race in this. And let me ask you the question, foreknown and predestined. Was Neil Armstrong predestined to be an astronaut? Was it God's great plan from the moment that he was woven together in his mother's womb to be an astronaut? I mean, Psalm 139 says it for all of us, right? Oh, Lord, you have searched me and you know me. You know when I rise and when I lie down. You discern my thoughts from far away. You have searched out my path, my lying down, and are acquainted with all of my ways. Even before a word is on my tongue, you know it completely. You hem me in behind and before. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. Listen to this. For it is you, God, who formed my inward parts. You who knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. So when God was making Neil, did he have it predestined for knowing that he would be an astronaut? I propose to you, no. If you go back and you look at that text in verse 29, it says, yes, that we have been For those whom he foreknew, he has predestined. Now, don't let that confuse you. He knew all of us. God knit each and every one of us together. God knows every hair or lack thereof that is on your head. And he can count them. Don't look around for the bald people. God has foreknown you. And that's a beautiful thing in my thinking. I hope it is for you. If you've ever wondered, am I here by accident? What's the meaning of life? Why am I here? What's my purpose? Friends, I'm here to tell you right now, you have purpose. God has created you, not by accident, that you are foreknown, that God loves you and God created you. God knit you together in your mother's womb, and God put us here. We have a purpose. That's the beauty of being foreknown, that God planned it even before the foundations of the earth that you and I would be here, and that we were predestined. Now, the literal word there, the Greek word for predestination, is prurizio. And prurizio means this, to have established boundaries. So all that predestination means is our pathway was not specifically and precisely determined, but that there are boundaries to where that pathway might go for us. In other words, God has given to us freedom, and you have the free will to do whatever it is that you feel called in your heart to do and inclined to do in your preparations. I think that Neil wanted to go to the heavens in part because he wanted to do great things, and those great things happened to form into the practice and the profession of being an astronaut. But that God didn't necessarily predestine him to do that precise thing. But God did predestine Neil, just as he predestines you and me and all of us who are created in the image of God to do great things for the glory of God, revealed among us. That's what I want us to hear in this idea that when we are foreknown, when God knew you even before he put you together, God planned for you a great purpose, and that purpose is this. It's just in that text that we read. We are predestined and called. We are called what? To be justified, to be glorified. Why? So that we might be conformed to the image of his Son. That you and I might be the image of Jesus Christ in this world and to all of those around us. Now, even though Neil didn't have the language of his faith to articulate it, what he did exemplified and glorified God. That's my estimation. Even though his words didn't determine that, and I think, again, part of that was because of the pain that he carried in his life for the loss of his daughter. There's some speculation that one of the things that Neil left on the moon when he went, because apparently there was this short amount of time where he just sort of disappeared. And they don't know exactly where he went or what he did. In the movie, they portray it as though he went and found a crater that he had chosen ahead of time before he got there, and he dropped into the crater a simple bracelet that was his daughter's bracelet that she had made and that he kept in the drawer after she died. Now, I don't know if that really happened. No one knows, and Neil never expressed it. There are some stories, in all the many stories that are out there, that speculate that he left some of his daughter's ashes on the earth, or from the earth on the moon. There's most that debunk that, but there's some sense that when he disappeared for a while, it was in order for him to do something that remembered his daughter. I don't know what it was, but I know this, that Neil had a longing. As I've read much of what he said before and while he was in this program and after the program, what he has done with his life, he did so because there was a glory of God in him that must be lived out, and he lived it out. So the question is for us, what are we predestined to do in the image of God? What have you been conformed to in that image of God, that you might be a firstborn in the large family? Did you know that? That you're a member of God's family, that you are a brother with Jesus, that you're a part of the heir of salvation. Now, it must have been tough to be Jesus' little brother. James had a tough go at it. But God calls us to be a part of who Christ is, that we might do as Jesus did, and that was to glorify God, to demonstrate in our own living that there is something bigger than us. And so I want to challenge us in that today, to be called, invited, summoned, that we would be called by God's grace within us to do something that is bigger than us and that is grander than we could ever imagine and that brings glory to God by what we do. That's what the space race was about. I got to tell you, when I've watched a lot of this stuff and read it, I was geeking out. I appreciate that there's that phrase now, that I can geek out. And not only could I geek out by watching a lot of this stuff and learning, there's this one scene where Neil, there's something going wrong with the space capsule that they're in, and it's beginning to spin out of control, and they're looking over and they're asking him what he's going to do, and he says, "Give me a minute." And he's got a piece of paper on his lap and his compass, and he's drawing out on graph paper, and he's calculating things by hand. And I'm thinking, this is crazy. There's more. If you have your cell phone, hold it in your hand a second. There's more technology right there in your hand right now than there was on Apollo 11. But yet they were able to accomplish it. How? It's impossible. Of course it was. They did something that was bigger than themselves, that took all of them coming together, just as Kennedy talked about it, that it mustered all of our capacity, all of our intellect, all of our knowledge, all of our will together, moving in one direction. Can you imagine if they were able to accomplish that with the limited technologies that they have? What could we do if we could muster together all that we are and all that we have and all that we're capable of in the glory of God that is within us? I can't imagine. And that's the point. I can't imagine. But I got to know and believe that it's bigger than us and that it's grander than anything, even grander than landing a man on the moon. And it didn't end there. 6 times. If I knew it, I'd forgotten it. 6 times we landed a lunar module on the face of the moon. 12 men walked on the face of the moon. Did you know that? A lot of you who are science buffs who are geeking out too, you probably did. But the other thing that I love is that I can also geek out in my theology. Now that's what we call church geeks. And I can church geek on this too, because this is exactly the story of Neil Armstrong is the story of our faith, doing something that is bigger than us, something that yearns within us that we can't articulate, but we have to live into. And when we know it, when we experience it, we know it, and we know that it is God in us. And so that's what I hope for us, that we as a church will do something that is bigger than us, and we will do something that glorifies God, and that you will know that you're destined to be a part of it. So I share that with us, and I challenge us in that, in the life that is ahead as we finish. As that last verse says, that we would be glorified, that God would be glorified through us. I wrote in my Bible a song. I wish I'd seen it soon enough, Vince. I could have told you and Dimitri, I Can Only Imagine. What a great song for that. I can only imagine. But here's the even better thing. What God has predestined us for, conforming us in the image of God, is even more than we could imagine. It is unimaginable, or as the scriptures also say, it is impossible. But you know what? You know where I'm going. All things are possible through Christ who gives us strength. Let's pray for that.